Good morning, Eric. How are you?
I'm great, Ryan. How are you doing?
I'm so excited for this conversation. Honestly, I was like, I was sitting here last night thinking, okay, how am I going to steer this conversation where you and I had jumped on a call and we immediately started tackling every single important topic, it seemed like, in the entire universe.
Yeah,
And I was like, there's not too many people I can do this with. So where do we start? And then what did I say to you? Do you have any thoughts?
yeah. I have lots of them.
A couple, right?
Yeah.
Well, Eric, with all of that, I just found it so enjoyable. Like we're jumping on, and like the amount of different types of topics that you and I rallied on right away. And when I think about the reason I'd reached out originally is, you and I were in that group with Rob Dubay and Gino Wickman in their new 10 disciplines coaching program. And I heard your story about doing the ESOP and saw some of your posts. I'm like, man, Eric's really thinking a lot about why he's doing what he's doing. So when we jumped on that call, I wasn't shocked, but I thought about starting, because I don't normally do this, Eric. Usually what I do is a story arc of like how someone got to where they are. But I wanted to start maybe with you, is like, why are you where you are?
Yeah.
Just your face reaction is like, I think it might have started because you got an ESOP, you got this IT company, which there are other ESOP IT companies, but I think your journey is very fascinating, and the thought you put into your paths on the way here. So I don't know how, but if you think that's a good container for the conversation.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to put this kind of animal in a box, so we'll see where it takes us. But I understand conceptually what you're asking, and yeah, I think on a prior conversation I told you I'm writing a book about my experience as an entrepreneur, and I'm doing it with the intention of writing it for myself. And then if other people get benefit from it, that's great. But I don't want to put the pressure on myself to write a bestseller or anything like that, because my experiences have been unique to me. And I hope that as I'm going through this, somebody will benefit from it, and maybe shorten a learning curve, or really put more intentional thought before they get too deep into their business and then have to struggle like I did to undo some of the things before the intention was there.
Well, and you right there, I think, is like where I wanted to really hone in with that question is, you like our conversation was like, I know it's the cliche of the name of the podcast, but like when you and I started talking, the amount of energy you have applied to why are you doing what you're doing? Maybe we start there. Like, why is that such a big deal for you? Because I've got, that I shared my stories with you of like why it's
Yeah.
so important to me, but like, why is understanding why you're doing what you're doing so important to you?
Yeah. I mean, again, not to get too philosophical, but like the
Come on,
whole
go for it, man.
why are we here? Like if you want to break it down to the whole existence phase, I'm doing a lot of work on self-development and just self-reflection and the meaning of life, and not to get, too deep into that, but there's a reason for everything. And so when I first started my business, the reason for that was I just couldn't stand where I was anymore. And I couldn't stand the way we treated our employees. I couldn't stand the way we treated our clients. It was a toxic culture. I think I told you I was going through a bottle of Tums every week, and people laugh, but I mean, literally no joke. I was buying the king size bottle, and by Friday they'd be gone because it was just so stressful. And so I quit and kind of just dove in head first on the urging of my father, his sage advice of, you have a credit card, go for it. And that is not my
Not
recommendation
financial
to your
advice.
audience. Yeah, caveat, asterisk, whatever you want to put there. Don't do what I did, because it was a different time. But I had this naivete of, I would say things and ask things that, normally you'd go, you said that in front of that person, or like I walked into a bank because somebody told me you need a line of credit, and here's this new business, and I walked into a bank and I asked for 25,000, and they said no, and I went, I've never missed a payment on anything. Why won't you give me? I'm good for it. And I stayed there until I talked to the bank president and walked out with a $25,000 line of credit.
Yes, I
You
love it.
can't do that. I mean, like there's, the 80s and 90s were a different time. Things were a little bit fast and loose and all of that. So but that was kind of there was really no why behind it other than I hated where I was and I had the bug of I could do better and people should be treated with respect and dignity. I mean, and that's
Where did that come from though, Eric?
my father. I mean, that was
Okay.
the whole, like his whole thing is he always put people ahead of himself. His, like whenever he was trying to teach me something mechanical, it's the right tool for the right job, just be proud of it. He was a truck driver, but he called himself a transportation engineer. He wore a collared shirt. His name was on it, American flag patch on the shirt. Like, you picture a truck driver
Pride. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
corporate outfit is not what you picture,
Hmm.
but it's kind of if you dress professionally, people will take you more seriously and those types of things. And when you think about it, even today, truck drivers, it's like the backbone of America.
Hmm.
Goods and services, like, things are hauled every day. Everything would stop if it wasn't for, the transportation. So he underlyingly knew that and kind of instilled that professionalism, treat people how you want to be treated,
Hmm.
do a good day's work, get a good day's pay, that type of stuff. So that was really the jumping off point. But it wasn't until I started getting help with coaches and mentors, and I was, this is the whole arc of, my story as I'm writing all this down and remembering all the twists and turns and the decisions I made. It's a miracle. Like you asked, how am I here? It's an absolute miracle because all the different opportunities and all the decisions that had to be made to get to this point, it still fascinates me. It's like, oh my God, I forgot about that. And if I would have made the other decision, none of this would have happened. I wouldn't have met this
Hmm.
person. I wouldn't have met this person. And all these coaches and mentors were really kind of the
Yeah.
guideposts that kept
You
me
like
going.
just bump you just to, and then all of a sudden the trajectory is 2 degrees off and take
Yeah.
10 years on top of it.
Well, and really being very intentional about reading, like that's the thing. You have to be kind of a lifelong learner, and you have to go into the books. And everybody gets something different out of books. And even myself, I'll go back and read a book 2, 3, 4 times, and it's like, oh, I missed that part, or oh, I'll get something new out of the book.
Context is different when you're picking it back up.
Yeah, and it shapes who you are. So that's, as your hair starts getting gray, and hopefully it stays for a while.
Hopefully
That's
I get to keep it, right?
that's been my thing. It's like I look back 5 years and how black has turned to gray, and it's still there. And I'm like, hey, that's great. It's still there. But you
um,
you become a different person. And so, you asked about my why. It's like once I was exposed to, that those types of people who force you to think about why you're doing what you're doing, and profit can't be the answer. I mean, profit is certainly important, and cash is the oxygen for your business. And there's a lot I've learned about financial metrics in a business. Your cash flow is you can be very profitable and still go out of business. A lot of people are surprised by that. It's like, well, if we're profitable every month, that's great. If you're not managing cash flow, all these things I've learned about, being a leader, a CEO. I don't have an MBA, didn't go to school for any of this stuff. But those people shaped me, and continuing to read and educate really started to get me to dig into my why. And as I started looking at what's happening and what's been happening to my industry and other industries with private equity, I'm now starting to get the anti-private equity moniker. Like I'm a little fish in a giant ocean, but I'm becoming public enemy number probably 850 on private equity's
I
list.
like I like that little caveat,
Yeah, I'm
but I'm
definitely
on the list.
I'm not the thing they worry about. I don't keep them up at night, but like I certainly am not a fan, because that is literally all return. And, I see it happening in our industry. So many roll ups. There's been probably about 3,000 since 2020. And you got people my age and older who just went through a pandemic, having an IT company. It's
You said
one of the most,
3,000, Eric,
yeah.
in the IT company. Like that many acquisitions have happened.
Oh, yeah.
Holy crap, man!
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. So our industry right now, the vast majority of organizations are under 1 million in revenue. So they're
Right.
trying to find their footing. And so there's about 10% that's marketable in terms of
Hmm.
that roll up. And there's just a stupid amount of money that has to be invested, because I think I was at a seminar. There's about $1.5 trillion in what they call dry powder that's got to be
Mhm.
invested in the next 5 years, and that money's coming.
Mhm.
And so everybody's got a price, they say. And if you don't have a why, then you're probably going to get enticed by a check at some point. And that was the thing. It's like I started looking at this as in terms of the problems in the economy and the problems in the country are this income inequality gap keeps growing, right?
Mhm.
So the haves have more and the have nots have less. And that divide just keeps spanning and spanning and spanning. And I'm going, okay, I'm going to get to a point. We all get in a point in our business as owners. You got a decision to make. You can't work forever, and you can work till you die, but that's still going to drop the problem in somebody else's lap.
Mhm.
So what's my choice? What's my path? And that's when we started doing open book, and then open book management led me to ESOP. And that was like, okay, so now if I make this my path, I won't have to make a decision about selling to private equity, take a 7-figure check, and then feel terrible the rest of my life that I sold out basically to the people who helped build the value of the business, but instead transfer the wealth into their hands and make this an evergreen business. And then next start incentivizing other companies to follow our path. And Certified EO, they just put out an article about creating an employee owned economy. And I'm like, I'm all on board for that. Like, okay, now my why and your why, like they're starting to sync up. It's like, yes, let's create a movement.
Mhm.
And so that's how we got to here today. That was my
I
short answer.
no, I think that's honestly it's beautiful, Eric, because it's a wonderful container because I think with that overarch or that story arch, we can get into like the different paths and the decision points, which is where I find things so fascinating. Where you are rare when you can articulate why, like you reflect on what could have been different. And because then we can get back into kind of the mechanics. I just had Corey Rosen on. I think you know that. I think
Yeah.
you had commented on it, and there's this alignment of incentives that can be pure and awesome at the same time. But like when we jumped on, it was like, whoom, we went right into the deep end in our first conversation. But it's like that takes a journey to get to that understanding. And I've had my own fascinating journey too to get to that like conclusion. And so like where like you mentioned a couple of times you started learn or reading and learning and you got fixated on that. I think you and I both shared some stories about how I mean, I was not a good student because no one ever told me why anything mattered. So then I just didn't care. And
Yeah.
so like, yeah, here I am consuming books at a rapid pace. I can't stop. Where did like the self-reflection kind of intrinsic motivation start happening to you?
Well, I mean, I'll piggyback on what you said. I'm dyslexic, so I always had a problem reading books. Like I wanted to read, but like reading was tough, and comprehension when you're a dyslexic is you have to kind of read 3 and 4 times for stuff to sink in. But I found audio, I can consume that at a rapid pace. So when Audible became a thing, it's like I became a
Boom.
much more rapid consumer of intellectual knowledge, and which just then sparked more in the brain. So that's
Did you desire the knowledge when you got because if all of a sudden you're listening to an audiobook, if you didn't desire it, even though it was your way of learning it, you might have not grabbed onto it like that. So what was the oh my god, it's finally here kind of thing?
well, as a child, I was one of those annoying why like it wasn't good enough to just because or that's the way we do it. Like I have to know how things work just to satisfy my brain and shut that part. Okay, good. Now we got it. Now we can move on to something else. Why? So that really is what drives me. And you talk about being in Gino and Rob's 10 Disciplines group, and the book recently that really just was kind of like, oh my God, somebody wrote a user manual for me, was the Doug Brackman's Driven book. And when I started going into that, it's like, oh, it's not this is actually genetic. I'm literally, I can blame DNA for this. This is why I am like I am. 5 to 10% of us are wired. And then when I took his test, like I'm the outer ring, 99.9th percentile of all weird people. Like, so, I mean, I have an excuse. It's genetic.
Well, and that's where like you and I immediately jumped in on that almost like starting point, going like I think what you and I have shared, and I feel like a lot of visionary entrepreneurs, if we were to pull, like, do some sort of test, not a personality test, but like what you just described, I think a lot of us would share the same qualities or characteristics where like there's this desire, and I don't know if this relates to you, is like, okay, if it's unknown, I don't like the unknown, so I want to go figure it out and then communicate it to others. So it's like you and I were talking about something like we mentioned the book Sapiens, or there's a couple other ones that you and I had talked about, but like where you go out to the chaos to then bring it back into put it into order. And
Yeah.
there's like this weird like fix on that. It's like a fix is what I've seen.
Well, it's the dopamine chase. It's like we're
Yeah.
wired to chase the dopamine, and you're never going to satisfy that. So you have to kind of learn how to, be a dopamine addict without being destructive. Like that's where
Hmm.
visionaries can find their true gift is if you have people around you who can help contain that, but still allow you to be yourself. I think that's part of it. But you got to understand yourself first, how you're wired, which is why Doug's book was so it was an epiphany. It's like, oh, these are gifts, like and when they're presented in the wrong way, it's very destructive, and you make people hate you in a very quick way. But when you realize what they are, and then you can not necessarily put containers on them, but put them in the appropriate light,
Hmm.
I think that gives you a superpower, basically. That again, you have to have the right people around you, and you have to be able to be transparent and all those things. But one of the things that drives me crazy is like you see a lot of these things and this might tick some people off, but like Grant Cardone is like look at listen to him and all stuff, and he is like like you should not listen to him. Like just because everything can be 10x doesn't mean it needs to be 10x. Like that's the why part, right? Okay, you should 10x, you should do the why, because that's what you teach, or like
And
is there
10x
a
what? Revenue, profit, happiness. Like what are you actually talking about here, right?
right. And well, and that goes back to like when as I'm writing my book, you look at a lot of unhappiness today in the country and in the world, and this was part of my journey is when I was in other peer groups, I was so stressed out not hitting certain metrics, or not, like the group was measuring against itself, and here's your bar. And you definitely need some type of parameters to keep your business in line, right? But I was stressing out because like I have this drive, like gotta be the top, gotta be the top. And then I just took a step back and I go, what are we doing here? Like, why are we
Why
doing?
again? Back to
Yeah,
the question of why.
yeah.
What's the
Well,
point?
and that's where we started changing our business, and I think it's helped incredibly in terms of trying not to kill everybody here, because there's a lot of companies that need help technology wise. Like that's never going to go away. So if we really pressed hard, if we 10x'd it, we could be selling like crazy. Well, when you sell like crazy in a service business that relies on people, you got to bring new people in. And if you've ever worked with people, the more of them you have, the more challenging it becomes, right? And I think there's some books, and we
It's
talked
an
about it like,
exponential nature. Every single node or person that comes in like ripples throughout the entire culture.
yeah, well, and I forget which book because so many of them reference it, but there's one that talks about the initial, like a pot of 150 is about the max number of people in a company.
Dunbar number.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
And beyond that, then it starts to lose its magic.
Was that Tribes book?
It's been in
There's a
so
bunch
many
that,
of
yeah, yeah,
them.
I agree.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like the concept started resonating, and it's like now, that's part of my bigger picture. Like, okay, well, what happens when we get to 150?
Hmm.
I'm thinking hopefully I'm not going to be around for that, but like somebody's going to
Yep.
have to deal with it. And if we're not intentional now, it's going to, that'll be the thing that kills us, which goes back to my driven
Yeah.
DNA is like I'm always looking for the dinosaur to come and bite my head off. But that's kind of the, I went back to that peer group stuff. It's like, okay, it's good to kind of benchmark, but in 2019 we for the first time ever we applied for the Inc. 5000, and we got in. We were like 26 or 2700, somewhere in there.
Hmm.
It was a crazy number. And I went to that conference, and I remember sitting there in the lobby in my tuxedo, sending messages back to the leadership team going, this is the worst night ever. I shouldn't be here. These people are all fake and plastic. Everybody's here just to hear their name. And I started having a conversation with a couple nice people, and they're like, where'd you land? And I'm like, because that's the question everybody had. What's your number? And it's like,
Just a measuring stick,
well,
everybody.
I started asking okay, wait a minute. So their metrics are based on growth only, like top line revenue growth. And again, you can grow really fast and go out of business. And they're like, well, thank God you weren't in the top 500. And I said, why? And they're like, 20% of them are out of business in the next year.
You know what's so interesting? When Jack Stack was on the show the first time, and I don't recall how he worded his involvement of like the founding of the Inc. 5000, or he was participating somewhere in it, and he said that he got out of it, like the association. He's like, what did he say? Something like half of the Inc. 5000 people can't afford 2 payrolls.
Right. Yeah. You're running. See, like when we talk about open book with our team, we look at our liquidity. So we have a liquidity number, and right now we're close to 4, right? And most people, if you don't know your liquidity number, and what that means is for every dollar of payables, we have $4 of free cash flow. We have $4 of
Mm-hmm.
cash in the bank to pay. So like we have a long run rate. We could go 3 months with income being completely shut off and still be able to pay our bills. Most
Mm-hmm.
companies are 3 weeks or less.
Yep.
And it's like, okay, well, you want to teach safety and security to your team. It's like, okay, well, let them know, hey, but you have to
Let
give them
them
the
know.
context of other numbers, because
Context. Yep.
otherwise they're like, oh, we're sitting on piles of cash. Give me a raise. And it's like, well, what value you're bringing to the company?
Yep.
That
Yep. Yep.
spurs
Yep.
other
That's not what
conversations
that
too.
4 is for. Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. Yep.
But if you
Yep.
don't teach them the whole picture, and you just give them a part, that's why people are afraid to open
Yep.
books, because it's like, you got to teach the whole thing. You can't
Yep.
just give them snippets, because they'll make up the rest of the story in their heads.
Yeah. So I before, because I love what it's a bunch of the comments you just said, Eric, and going back to what is the game that we're playing. So what I heard is like, you're in other peer groups talking about revenue and growth, and then you're in the Inc. 5000 talking about growth.
Mhm.
And I don't know about if you had the similar experience in school, but it goes back to the why in the absolute hell are we doing what we're doing? And my entire life, people just gave BS answers. and like, and there's that book, I think you and I had talked about, this is way beyond most of this podcast, but the beginning of Infinity book that I'm like trying to trudge through, that is insane. And his whole book is like human beings on a search for good explanations. And I was like, back to your point of like DNA, it's like, I hadn't been getting good explanations. Like, oh, your job is to get a 4.0. Why? To get a job. Well, I was selling lawnmowing services this summer, so I don't need to go to school to sell. It's like, so why? Because I'm like, well, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And then you just pull the thread, and you're just like, and then so it was like the grades or the GPA, and then or like the revenue, and then like, and then when I got into the family business, like we're selling copiers. Well, they don't actually need another copier, so why are we going to jam another lease down their throat and re-up them?
Right.
It's just like, eh, ah.
Well, you start pulling at those threads, and what you realize is the person you're talking to hasn't thought it through. And so they're just regurgitating what's been, and that's how generationally people become ignorant, is they
Uh-huh.
just accept the status quo. And I did this like early on, with like Christmas never made sense to me. Like I was raised Lutheran, and like the minute I could start thinking for myself, I was like, okay, tree, Santa Claus, Jesus, the Easter, like where does all this stuff come from? And then you start asking people who don't know the answers, and they just like, well, this is just how it's always been. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
the tree's a pagan symbol. Jesus is under the tree with Santa Claus. Help me understand. And you start pulling at people's core beliefs, and that's where you start making enemies too. That's the thing you have to be respectful about. The way you go about this is like, hey, I'm not knocking you, I'm trying to learn for myself, and if you don't know the answer, that's great. Let's find the answer together. But a lot of people, if that's their foundation of their world and you've just fractured it, it's like they're not going to want to go on that journey with you.
Okay. So you just touched on a couple. Yeah, yeah. You could see me like, oh my God, you gave me some serious
Yeah.
juice there. Is that I love how you frame that. And there's a psychologist that you and I have talked about in the past that the the interesting way of it was Jordan Peterson talking about, and I know he's divisive, and all this stuff bothers me so much because he's a brilliant psychologist. Obviously, whatever he's doing in the news is his deal, but his body of work I found very fascinating, where he said that betrayal is one of the hardest things that people experience, because what it does, Eric, is it, and I'm not saying this to you because you might already know this, but like you have to rethink your whole past, every decision you made in your whole past, because what your fundamental belief system was like the order of the hierarchy was reshuffled, and you have to go back and go, okay, well, how did I make every decision up until this point, and then what's my entire projection of the future?
Yeah.
So why I'm bringing this up is the curious mind bumps into that, like you said, with everybody's. And so, like, you pull the thread for their own curiosity to answer the why question. But then, where I've experienced, just like you said, man, and I never intended these outcomes, but like, why does private equity exist, or why does this? And then all of a sudden you're like pissing everybody off. And you're like, no, I'm just trying to understand. And then it's like, because the answers either suck or they're not good, or like, and I'm not saying good or bad for any of these topics, but it's like you start bumping into these beliefs and people aren't in this self-reflection journey, like maybe on the same trajectory, whatever it is. And then it's like, crap, what do you do with that? I don't know.
Yeah.
Have you experienced similar things like that, or?
Oh, well, I mean, you just try to have a conversation about politics with anybody today. And that's the thing is so many people believe, like, if you actually take the left and right and Republican, Democrat, independent thing out of the equation, and you just have a non-political conversation about, let's just say, border security. Most common people are going to say, well, of course we want secure borders. Now it's how we go about doing that
Mm-hmm.
where the divide starts to happen. But the common like outcome is we just want security. Everybody
Mm-hmm.
wants to be safe and secure. And it's like we used to be such a more centrist group. And then, again, the purpose of politics when the country was founded, and we don't want to get into the
We're not
why
getting
of
into
it.
politics, just understanding the
Yeah,
system.
yeah, yeah, but like the whole purpose of being going to government was to serve a little bit and then go back to private, so it wasn't intended to be a career.
Mhm,
Well, it started to become a career, and then there was this shift where they spend now more time fundraising than they do actually legislating. And it's like the whole goal of a politician is to remain in power. It's not to serve the people. So now we're buying into these narratives of, well, that's the person I support and that's the message I support, but nothing ever gets done about it.
mhm,
And instead of us coming closer together and compromising a little bit, nobody gets anything they want, but everybody gets something. It's
mhm,
now you're either on my team or you're the enemy.
mhm,
And that happens when you start to crack at that foundational beliefs.
mhm.
And that's the same thing with religion, with politics, with all these
Well,
divisive things.
and that's like what you just said too is like the premise of the clip I almost sent you this morning that I said was going to derail us because of the author. I cannot pronounce his name, of *Sapiens*. But the reason all of this is relevant to business and leadership is that it's this we build these narratives in. What I found fascinating about your journey is like you were challenging the narratives of others. So like I find that a lot of entrepreneurs, we have this desire to create our own narratives that are true and we believe, but then some of the times like there's a struggle to evolve that narrative over time. And I've watched you evolve that narrative. So how do you handle like reassessing and updating your narratives? Because like you said you were going through a bottle of Tums a week.
Mhm.
Right. So, like, what allowed you to say, hey, this is not working and this narrative and what's going on here is not working? And where did you look to find those mentors or those people to push you in the right direction?
Well, in situations like that, when I was younger, you just the youth, the inexperience, like you just have a lot of energy to compensate for everything else. Like, and you
That's a
just you
good
just try
point.
to plow through it, right? And you get, even at that stage, you get to a point where you're just tired of plowing through it. And I just woke up one day and it was like I was done. I was just like, I have no more to give to this cause, and I'm killing myself. And it's like, is this a cause? Is this the hill I want to die on, like figuratively and literally? And it was
Mm-hmm.
like, no. And again, it's like, well, you just start questioning yourself. Why am I doing what I'm doing? And that was really the catalyst to just quit. And I didn't have a plan like beyond that. But like, again, being inquisitive has been the catalyst that's brought me to the right people. And I think if I wasn't inquisitive, it's like that's when you get sucked farther into the black hole. Like if
Mm-hmm.
if if you have this inquisitive nature, and it's again with the intent of understanding and not try, like some people go at it as like, well, I'm going to try to prove you wrong. And it's like, oh, okay, well, go ahead. But like, if I'm just trying to understand so that I can be a better human being and be better to the community, the society, the planet, whatever, I mean, that's what drives me is I don't want to be a destructive force. I want
Hmm.
to help other people, and I can't do that being ignorant. So I need to educate myself. And then that's where I have tolerance problems. I'm still working on me of I'm on this journey and I have to realize I'm in a different place than other people are. And so I have
Oh,
to,
that's tough, isn't it, man?
well, space and grace, because like if I
Yeah.
would run into my 25-year-old self, that would not go well.
Yeah.
Right. So I have to
I'm
remember
trying to
that,
think of
like,
who would headbutt who first, me or the old me.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's the thing is you have to kind of constantly remind yourself that, hey, I was once ignorant too, and that was about 5 minutes ago, and I'm still ignorant, and I'm on this, the path to enlightenment is a never-ending journey. You're constantly learning, and you're constantly. I don't know everything, and I'm in search of more. I'm in search of more answers. I'm in search of more kindness. I'm in search of more space, more grace, and if you do enough of that, it rubs off, I think, on enough people. That's how movements get started, is you just
Hmm.
have to be a leader by example in a lot of cases, not necessarily be the loudest talker or
The
any of
Grant
that stuff.
Cardone. This
Yeah,
is
yeah, he's yeah.
Pardon the brief interruption. I just wanted to drop a quick note on the sponsor from Arcona's financial dashboard offering. We have a financial dashboard that connects your operations to your financials, and we connect that to your target normalized EBITDA and valuation in the future. So you have a clear roadmap on all the decisions that you need to make to stay on track and make sure that you create wealth, enjoy work, and make an impact and build a valuable asset gives you the choices. And I think it's crucial because when I think about what Eric's talking about, we can get clear on what we want, but we still going to have the financial wherewithal to go get it and to have an infrastructure and a healthy company with good cash flow that allows us to do what we want. And if we have good cash flow, we have more options. So if you're interested in a complimentary financial assessment, all you have to do is go check out the link in the show notes below, where all you have to do is schedule a discovery call with me and my team. We ask you a couple of questions to see if you qualify for that complimentary financial assessment, where my team will connect that dashboard and they'll come back to you with their thoughts, their opinions on what's working, what's not working, and you'll get a look and see of what your financials could look like in a way that makes sense so you can make good decisions. So if you're interested in that, go check out the show notes below and schedule a discovery call. And with that being said, I hope you enjoy the rest of the evening with Eric. What I find interesting about your journey, and I just actually interviewed Tom Walter yesterday. So like,
Love Tom.
yeah, I know. And it just so happened to be two people that I met at, through the Small Giants community in two back-to-back days. But what I find interesting about both your stories is you got this hard spot and you chose to be more open than what so many people I have experienced and I understand why people would say, okay, I'm burnt out eating a bottle of Tums. Maybe there's cash flow issues. I don't all the problems that business ownership comes with. People I've watched make, like my father and I, like, make a drastic move, sell the company, then reassess, versus taking a methodical approach to the other side of like the challenge. So like, what do you think was part of your like default to like be open and not just pull like a ripcord on the situation?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that in the context of Tom Walter, because his brother Kevin was our coach for Open Book.
That's
And
crazy.
so, yeah, well, Kevin was pretty instrumental in helping me understand you have to be vulnerable. Being the leader of an organization doesn't mean having all the answers. If you're the smartest person in the room, you've really done something wrong in terms of building your company. Now, if you're one person, you're going to be the smartest person in the room because it's
Hmm.
just you. But the goal is not to get people who are less. You're trying to build a culture, and you're trying to add to that culture, not surround yourself with people who think and act just like you. They're driven maybe to the same purpose and cause, but
Hmm.
you want different opinions. You want, and you have to be vulnerable. That's the thing. It's like I've had many opportunities to our team, and as we do it, as we continuously grow, talk openly about mental health challenges I've had. I've battled depression most of my life. I've been in therapy for, 5, 6, 7 years, whatever it's been now. And, by doing that, you humanize yourself, but you also connect with people more, I think. And that's the thing. It's like it can be a very lonely position because there's not many people I can talk to about the challenges of running a business,
Mm-hmm.
because you don't want to scare them, and you don't want to, make it seem like you don't have, it's like, I'll put the
You got to
pieces together,
pick
find
and
the
choose who
people.
you're. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, yeah. So, but being transparent and being vulnerable are two qualities I didn't have initially. But, again, working with Kevin, and, once again, the more people, like, we have these common circles, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you just get open to these people who are all really focused on just understanding, learning, improving, sharing, caring, and they
Mm-hmm.
lead by example, and then that just becomes part of who you are. So
Through the
that's,
osmosis kind of thing. And
yeah.
have you ever struggled with so like, I'll explain like where this is coming from. You know, the context is like if you're because I think we share this, like growing up asking why, getting narratives that don't make a lot of sense, and then getting thrown into a situation that where you think you got control. Like I like jumped into the family business and we think we have control. So therefore I like what I experienced was like, hey, and whether it was the family business or the last 10 years that I've been building what I've been doing is like, it might be a chaotic mess, but at least it's my chaotic mess that I've got some sort of control over. And it's a narrative that I'm evolving myself. And what I've struggled with in the past is like, when it starts to not work, which I've had many of those situations,
Mhm.
I've struggled then figuring out how to actually be vulnerable and open to the right people instead of in trying my hardest not to be resentful, because then there's these narratives. So it's like, well, those narrative, I rejected those narratives because I think they suck and they don't make sense. And I just refuse to like capitulate to go buy in to make my situation work.
Right.
If you're tracking me. So it's this balance between like, I know being vulnerable and open should get me through this crap, whatever I got going on. But like resentment, it's like almost like the default. I don't know if you're tracking what
Yeah.
I'm explaining here.
Well, the first part about it is control is an illusion, right? Like, my viewpoint of the world and the universe is like everything is random and chaotic. It is what it is. And then I lean on stoicism of you can't control what happens around you, but you can control how you react to the situation.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing that I've been working on for several years now, is my response to stimuli, whatever that may be,
Yeah,
right? So it
good,
could
good
be
one.
people, it could be business events, it could be world events, it could be any of that stuff. So if I'm that's the one part I can control. Everything else is an illusion of control, because you just,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
could line all the dots up and it still goes horribly wrong. So that's really kind of how I handle it. And then part of it being a visionary is I'm not very good at process and discipline and all the things that, actually make a company function. So you've got to get good at picking,
the
surrounding
right
yourself
people.
with people who are good at that. And if it doesn't work, you got to look in the mirror first. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's another thing that I've gotten used to is, Patrick Lencioni has a book. He's got a lot of books, and I forget which one it is, but it was really kind of a tipping point for me as I was reading it. In a lot of the peer groups, they start teaching you about, this is the pyramid is the hierarchy of the business, and you want to sit at the top of the pyramid as the CEO. And it's like, yeah, you're pretty much building a company where you abdicate up the way, and then everybody else is responsible, and you got nothing to do. And it's like, yeah, if you want to build a really crappy company, that's a great way to look at it. But if you flip the pyramid on its head, and the CEO's at the bottom holding everything up, you kind of have to embrace, I think it's like he calls embrace the suck, embrace,
Yeah.
you're going to have the worst job in the company. You're going to have all the different difficult conversations. When things go wrong, the fingers are going to be pointed at you and you can't point them back. And when things go right, they're going to be pointed at everybody else. And that's your life. Yin.
Well, it's really interesting because even when I was talking to Tom yesterday, he said, he said that because I was asking him, like, with open book management, do you feel like you have to be an ESOP because it goes back? I mean, if you think about your and I's common theme of like the incentives and the explanation has to be peer to the root cause. And I find it funny that we're both from IT. Like, what's the root cause? It's like, but and Tom said, yeah, you don't actually, if you have it all out there, most of the employees don't want ownership because they're like, yeah, that looks like it sucks. Just show me the money and show me how I can participate. And I was like, wow, that's so fascinating.
Yeah, trying to figure out what people want, especially in the post-COVID world. Like, I don't think most people know what they want. Like, that's the, I
I
don't,
agree.
I think they might have had a little bit of a clue, but again, if you start poking at their why, they're chasing somebody else's dream. They're chasing the Instagram lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody on Instagram posts the best parts of their life in small little captions, and then the 98% of their life that sucks it doesn't go on there. It's like, hey, here's a picture of me with my family and they're all sick with the plague, and hashtag
Smiling
great
for
life. It's like that never makes it up there, but they're chasing this dream of like, well, let's live on an island and be. And I guarantee you, I guarantee you, for the vast majority of people, because I know a lot of really unhappy millionaires. So
mm-hmm.
people who have sold their businesses and have literally no reason to get up in the morning, they have no purpose, no why, no drive, but they were living somebody else's fantasy of getting to the exit, getting that big payout, and they achieved it. And it's like, now what?
Mm-hmm.
You can only
Mm-hmm.
play so much golf. You can only, and that starts to get really a boring life. And then you start to realize you sold your baby. The people that you really enjoyed being around, they're all gone because you sold them off into whatever. And it just, like, there's got to be, okay, why, okay, then why, then why.
Yes,
Like,
yes, yes, yes.
you just got
Well,
to
and
keep asking.
Well, and this is why I love our conversation before, and this one is that like I don't know if I told you before, the podcast used to be called Life After Business, Eric, for 4 years
Yeah.
before turning into intentional growth. And I kept realizing what you just said. People would come on this show and they're totally miserable. And
Yeah.
I'm like you have this $1 billion in this colorful pie chart on Charles Schwab, and no one needs you and no one cares. And like, so it's really fascinating. Go back to your first couple comments, is that cash is the oxygen of the business, but it's not the purpose.
Correct.
Is how kind of how you said it. So when you said that, like, here's the analogy that went through my head is like, so if we were to say the purpose of life, if we were to just take that metaphor analogy, I don't know whatever word it is, but like the purpose of life is not to breathe, right?
Right.
And so the purpose of life is not to eat. The purpose of life is the experience, but we need oxygen to keep experiencing.
Right.
So it's like it's so parallel. Like we need cash flow and a healthy value to keep being, but like the business should be, right?
Right.
it's not, yeah, it's just an interesting parallel.
Well, if you're doing the right things for the right reasons for the right people, the cash will come. Like, that's but you have to measure that. And if you're not where you need to be, then you have to look at what, the numbers tell the story. Where are we missing the mark? Are we not providing value? That, do people not see value in what we're doing? So there's a lot of that unpacking that has to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But you need the metrics for the guidepost. But again, if profit is the number one reason, then you're going to get what you get. And
It's like AI, where if you didn't tell AI that human life is important, it will consume human life. And it's just it I'm curious to your, because you and I were sharing about education and growing up, is like, so the reason I got involved in the numbers, Eric, because I was literally a terrible student, didn't understand finance at all, other than what should I sell this copier for? How much gross profit should I jam into this lease so that way I can make my commission? That's how I started to get understanding of numbers, because I was like, I get paid. But when I started into, after we sold, and I tried to trying to understand what happened, kind of this whole conversation we're talking about of like, what's the purpose? And then like, well, then it first went to it's the money, and then I had to go in, and that's why I ended up landing in understanding finance, because you just said the numbers are the story. So
right.
what's your experience with like the rest of the world and the numbers, and how you see numbers fitting into like the game, and how they're important?
Well, I mean, using your example, right? So in our business, we don't allow commissions. And so, when we talk about the why, so if I'm going to have somebody representing our company going in front of a client and they're going to make a recommendation, if there's a financial incentive for the person making the recommendation, whose best interest is that recommendation probably going to be in? The person who gets the commission, right? Am I going to give you the thing that I can make the most money on or the thing that'll benefit you the most? So we take that out of the equation. And that's not to say that most people are wired that way, but like if you give an opportunity, it's hard to build trust with your clients in the relationship if they know there's a potential or if they even assume or think there's a financial incentive. So we get that out of the way even in our sales process, and we say this is one of the things that makes us a bit unique is we don't allow that. Now, we'll incentivize people on the health of the company and they'll share in the profits. And again, they share in the ownership part of it. That's kind of the, you know,
Hmm.
help make it great and we'll give you part of it. But again, if you incentivize, if you place the incentive in the wrong place, now the incentive is like, you're measured by how much you're helping the customer, not how much you're
Hmm.
bringing in on commission or how many deals you close. So it's really, it's the why of the numbers. It's like, well,
Hmm.
why do we do this? Why do I have commission on that? And if you ask a lot of companies, that they might not even have the answer of why they're commission based. It's like, well, that's because that's how salespeople get paid. And it's like, well, is it? You
Well,
know,
and let's just for the people that might be skeptical of what you're saying right now. You're not. I'm putting words in your mouth right now, and I want you to correct me or
sure,
agree. Is you're not saying profit's not important, right? Like
correct,
and because that's immediately because it's the binary thought process of like, well, if you're not commission based, are you nonprofit and you're sacrificing the potential growth and your potential employee's salary. You know what I mean? Like there's the
yeah,
immediate jump to the other end of the spectrum, and you're
yeah.
not saying that.
Well, yeah, profit's the result of again doing the right things for the right people, at the right times. And if you're creating value, people will pay for value. Like that's always been true in business. If you have something of value, people will pay, the right people will pay for it. The people that you're helping,
Hmm.
the people who see that value. If you commission somebody, that's not to say you underpay. You just have a different compensation structure. And, our values are, here's your base salary for doing your job, here are the parameters for your job, and then if we do well as an organization, which you're directly responsible for, like you have a big role in that, because if you keep the customer happy and you give them the things they need and their business grows, like they'll reward us with, as they grow, we'll grow.
Hmm.
And as the profit piles, you'll get a piece of that, and you'll also, the longer you're here, you'll get more of the company.
Hmm.
Like it's just a different compensation model, but it's based on value, not based on how many of something
Short
you can
term,
shove
like
down somebody's throat,
right,
like
right,
you
right.
said.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. And it's this incentives to go back and say, but I just had a comment. My partner, Joel, he said that one of the people in his life that as he was growing his family business before, and I don't know if it was in the family business or before he sold the private or after when he sold the private equity is the revenue that you get is a thank you. So money shouldn't be something that's bad. It's a thank you for
Mhm.
something you did for someone. So if you're making a buttload of money for the right reasons, it's just a bunch of thank yous.
Yeah.
I just
And
love
then
it.
if you have a good why, then you can use that to do even more good in the world, right? I mean, that's the thing. It's if you become, Zig Ziglar had the thing like you can have anything in the world you want as long as you help other people get what they want and need,
Hmm.
right? So like if you and I'm not against people having a lot of money, if you're creating value, and then what you do with that says a lot about you as a person. If it's all about accumulating things, I mean, that's something you'll have to reconcile with yourself. Like I can't, for me personally, the material stuff is not the mark I want to leave.
Hmm.
But that's, everybody has to go through their own why journey, right? So why are
Hmm.
you buying all this stuff? What are you compensating for? Like why do you need things to make you
Hmm.
happy? I'm
Yes.
more of an experience person. Experiences are, people and experiences are what make me happy. And there's nothing better than hearing from, an employee or a client or a friend or something like that. Hey, what you did or what your company did really made a difference.
Hmm.
Like you want to light me, like that's the thing that lights me up.
Hmm. Well, and I think that most people are human. Well, people are human, so most people will think.
Most of them.
There's some question marks out there these days, but the
Sure.
I think I lost my train of thought. That was so funny. um, is oh, I know what I was gonna say. So, how do you work with other people around you, whether it's peers that are entrepreneurs or mentors or your executive team or your employees, get this mindset?
Well, you have, I mean, first and foremost, you have to lead by example. Like, again, I think that's that truth and transparency. So I'm not somebody who's going to be bright and cheery 100% of the time, all day, every day. And so for me to expect everybody else to be like that, I mean, that would be fake. But what we try to do is make sure we're not like living in the negative. Like stuff is going to happen. Life is life. It's not, it's chaotic, it's random.
Mm-hmm.
Like even the best thing,
We have
worst
no
things happen to
control.
best people. But again, it's how you react to situations. It's that's the one thing that's in your control. So first and foremost, if I'm not living the values I'm hoping to surround myself with people who have like-minded, well, it's all a fraud. The house of cards, everything falls apart from there.
Mm.
So, but if somebody's struggling, Simon Sinek has a bunch of great content on empathy. And he has one video where he talks in, like, most companies come in, it's like, hey Joe, you didn't hit your sales numbers this last quarter. If you don't hit them again in this quarter, you're going to be gone. Like that's, if they lead with the threats, like, hey, if
Mm-hmm.
we threaten you, you'll improve your performance. But, he says, if you come in with empathy, hey, Joe, you didn't hit your numbers. What's wrong? Everything okay? Tell me, something going on in your life. Like, and most of the times you're going to get like, how, my mother is sick, or, something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where some of the managers and leaders aren't prepared to handle that kind of response, because it's like, now it's like, okay, well, great. Well, we still got a company to run here.
Right.
How do you deal with that? So you really got to set people up, to, we're all in relationship businesses, even internally,
Right.
and it's just managing that. But if you're a bad example, how are you supposed to expect somebody else to kind of center it and bring
Right.
it back? And
Well, and this is where, like, I'm tracking you, and I think about the incentive and the root cause that, like, the root north star. Like when we peg ourselves as people or companies towards a goal, everything aligns towards that. I mean, like, not to go down the AI road, but like that's the biggest question everybody's asking right now, and everybody's fighting about is what's the alignment? Like, how do they treat? Can they be ethical or not? And the alignment. My point is like that root goal, whether it's in the whole the whole workshop and keynote that I travel across the country do is like revenue doesn't solve our all of it, because like I literally, like, you can have a bunch of revenue go bankrupt, so like that can't be the goal, because then everything aligns towards a goal that doesn't make any sense. So then why I've been on this journey, Eric, for 10 years is like ownership becomes like one of the main things. Like every human being needs ownership because it's money, and money is a fundamental exchange of trust between human beings. Like money in the three statements is literally how we communicate value between each other. So it's like psychology, but math is like one thing. and like, and then if we have this ownership, which is like we're all providing value every day to a company, and then like it's we should be all steering towards the right direction. But like I think it's such a to highlight the contrast of this goal, Eric, and what kind of teeing you up for the ESOP conversation is like my partners turned their company into an ESOP. Then 3 years later, they were sold to private equity because it was such a huge offer, kind of triggered the whole sale process with the trustee and such. But like to say it as simple as this is 280 people on one, like for 3 years, woke up creating value for everyone for 280 people based on the percentage of salary based on their role and the value they were creating. And then day two, they were waking up creating value for 12 people for a fund that was from Israel. Like you can't argue with like that statement. Whether it's right or wrong is not for this podcast, but like just the pure alignment of like, here's what the goal was, and now here's what the goal was, and it's just different. And then all of the ripple effect that happens from that, So I mean, I don't know if there's a question or comment there, like kind of thinking through just the goal and then your ESOP and how these all the symptoms align. I just find it's hard to argue with how that fact lays out.
Well, that was something that I discovered this year. So again, when you talk about going layers deep on the why, if you don't go deep enough, at some point you run the risk of something having unintended consequences, right? And that's always the risk. And what you just outlaid there is like, hey, we went ESOP, but private equity still got its hands some way, shape, or form because the offer was just too great. And so the difference there is if you're changing one life or you're changing 280 lives, it's still a point in time and it's not a movement, right? That's kind of how I look at it. So when we were at Small Giants earlier this year, Lauren Feldman was doing a segment with a friend of mine, Delcy Bean, who owns Paragus IT out in the Boston area.
He's on my list because I was sitting right over.
Yeah.
Camille's been
Get
on the
him on the
podcast,
yeah.
right? Yeah, that's
He's
awesome.
another rabbit hole guy. Like you get him on, you'll be talking for 3 hours, but he's a great human being. And so, he was going to talk about his journey, because they're, I think, like a 40% and they were going to go to 100 this year. And so Lauren asked him, he says, okay, well, now you'll be giving up controlling ownership because now you won't be the majority owner. Like right now, I still own 70% of the company and 30% ESOP. So I still make the
Hmm.
decisions on that. But once you're 49 or less, it's like, now the board's involved, trustees are involved, like other people are making decisions on behalf of the shareholders, which is the employees.
Hmm.
What's to stop private equity from coming? And Lauren asked him, he said, what's to stop private equity from coming in and just offering a stupid amount of money? And now you're out and it's now in private equity's hands. And just the look on his face and my face, if somebody would have been there with a camera, was like, oh crap, we didn't think that far through. But then that's where, again, having a wide circle, you look at like what Ari Weinswig is doing with Zingerman's. They put their business in a perpetual
The
purpose
trust. Yep.
trust.
Yep.
And so I'm like, oh, I have more learning to do. Like now I have to see if I can get, what we've done here so far backed out and into a PPT so that, private equity can't get its hands on it in the future when I'm not around and things like that. And the interesting thing is like I've written some articles on LinkedIn about, this whole journey to ESOP, and I'm not real kind to private equity in my writings. Like I'm not a fan if it hasn't come across at this point. And I had somebody from private equity reach out on LinkedIn in the messaging app and say, hey, I just read your article about your journey to ESOP. That sounds really great. Like, big fan. How can private equity participate? And I'm like, well, I wanted to say, like, at what point in the article did you stop reading? Because had you gotten all the way through, you probably would have known I'm not receptive to this line of questioning. But
So
that's the
mhm.
why. It's like, okay,
Well,
we
and if you're
got
pulling the
here.
thread to the end incentives, and which has always led me to money, Eric. Like
Yeah,
money is the exchange of trust and value between humans. That's how we communicate. And
yeah,
we need a medium of exchange, which is currency, like, which is why I've gone down the rabbit hole of money for like 10 years now. And
yeah,
what I find fascinating, and I want to do this for the listeners too, because I think part of the point in time with private equity too, let me give you just my opinion and see how you want to react to it, is that because money, I believe, is neutral. It's the intent behind the person that money empowers the intent behind the person, right? So, like, I'm not saying right, like you should agree, but like that's how I view it. And so, when I think about business, and if money is the oxygen of business, which has an intent, product, services, I mean, it should be whatever they're doing for the customer, not necessarily just the shareholders, right? Conscious capitalism, hence all the point where I'm like, okay, well, the intent, the oxygen goes in and the intent should be driven off of what they're doing. So like, I think like how I've tried, why I struggle with this, Eric, is that I don't think all private equity people are bad, or I don't think anybody that I can't put superlatives or big, huge, overarching generalizations to categorize everyone. And I don't think you would agree. I think you would agree with that. But then I think private equity and venture capital, because of 0% rates for 14 years, became an unhealthy percentage of the marketplace. It's so like I still think that there's good actors, Brent B. Shore, Sonny Vanderbeck. There's a bunch of people doing some great things in this space, but when you have the industry that disproportionately has the wrong intent, that's when it gets all out of whack. But I find it that I struggle having these conversations with people because they can't have the dualism at the same. You know what I mean? Like they can't have them both be true at the same time. But I feel like I'm okay with that. How do
Yeah.
you feel about what I was just said?
Well, so in the big picture, and this is going to be all over the place, but
It's
what's
okay.
main?
That's why I love
Yeah.
it.
So if you've ever watched any Marvel movies, you're familiar with the character Thanos, like the guy who decides on his own that the universe is out of balance, and I'm going to be the guy who comes in and creates equal balance across the. And in order to do that, I have to kill 50% of all living things, right? So the intent of I need balance, I'm 100% on board with Thanos in the that's my why, right? Like there's a gap in income inequality, and I'm trying to close that gap. So the people who have less are going to certainly rally behind my cause, right? Because it's like, hey, he's fighting for us. He wants to increase, the income that we have, which should increase the quality of life. And again, money equals freedom in a lot of people's eyes, freedom of choice, freedom of, like they want that safety and security. So the people on that side of the equation are certainly going to be in the camp of, yes, let's get this gap closed. The people who have too much and are too much control are going to absolutely be like, I'm not giving up what I have, right? I earned this. Whatever the case may be, which leads to the question is, and this is where you'll never get a universal answer because of humans and the human condition, is how much is enough? And that answer is going to be different for everybody. Like how much is enough before it's okay for somebody else to have some? And then there's the whole value conversation. It's like, well, should everybody be equal? And my answer is equal opportunity doesn't equal equal outcomes.
That is so convoluted these days, right?
Right. And it's like I'm not a warrior of like everybody should be on the same playing field with the same. That's not what I'm saying. It's like we need to close the gap because power and money concentrated too much leads to corruption. It always does. History has shown us. And that's the whole anarchist way of thinking, is like decentralize it. No central form of government, no central leadership, no nothing. And I'm somewhere in between on
Centrist.
that, is
Yeah.
like, and I don't necessarily have the answer either of like, I can say for me how much is enough, like when it's like, okay, and I tend to donate time and money disproportionately than I probably should if I listen to financial advisors and things like that. But again, you got to know my why and get into all that. But part of one of those articles I read after the Inc. 5000 is, and it's that whole growth. Like I came to a conclusion for us as a company, 15 to 35% year over year growth is the Goldilocks zone. And the
Mm.
reason why is over 35% creates chaos from a culture standpoint, because now you're probably having to hire faster than you reasonably can if you're really intent on your why and finding the people who will either, add to the culture but believe what you believe and want to do things for the reason. Below 15% and you're not creating enough opportunity for people to grow within the company, and they're
Mm.
probably not going to stay. So, but if you're in that spot, you can comfortably exist forever. That's to
Hmm.
me the right amount of growth. And
Hmm.
I know there's a vast majority of organizations who would disagree with that. And it's like, well, 200%, 300%, it's like once you get to like 20 million, 40 million, 100 million, 200% growth gets really hard. At a million, 200%
Well,
growth,
and
that's
like and
easier.
well, 100% agree with you. And what happens is, if I mean, people, I mean, I don't know how many people I've had on the podcast where they grew themselves into bankruptcy or had to sell. So
Mhm.
they run out of the oxygen because they're growing too fast. And there is this balance. I mean, the yin and yang symbol and order and chaos. I mean, there's a reason that this dualism exists. And I think it's fascinating that you goes back to what's the intent. And if the, like, back to like your talk about like balance and like just incentives and why are we doing what we're doing, where if the why is pure money motivated, I don't have an issue with money. I want lots of money. That's why I do what I do. Like, I just want to be very clear. But like what happens is then if it's the sole incentive, then everything, like unravels in a weird, unfunctional, they're dysfunctional way. Like, I mean, when I found out that derivatives counted as GDP, Eric, I immediately was like, who gives a shit about GDP then? Because they're made up numbers on top of someone else's cash flow. So it's
Hmm.
actually not a good in service. So then GDP means it's I don't trust it anymore.
Right.
You know what I mean? And then again, that's the pull in the thread. And it kind of goes back to that incentive alignment, and just saying, okay, well, what is the ultimate goal? What is the purpose here? Because then everything unravels from there. How do you communicate this to your team? Is it, hey, we're an ESOP? Like, how do you communicate that and then beat that drum in a way that people understand in your organization?
Well, I try to start with, again, the why. Like, so I take it back to the roots. Like, here's why I'm doing this as a founder and a CEO and as the sole owner originally of the company. I said nobody lives forever. I have a choice. At some point, if I didn't have a path, I was going to be forced into a decision. So I'd rather plan ahead. And I could be part of the machine that sells to private equity, because that's the big play in our industry right now. There's lots of money, there's the easy outs, easy exits. Or I could believe what I believe about the income inequality gap, which you're probably affected by. I talked about the people
Mm-hmm.
who are coming in, and I said, so I could either choose to be one of the haves and go farther this way, or I could take less and still I'm going to be fine, be okay, but then set this up to where now we have this group who are creating the value, and we're sharing in the value. And
Mm-hmm.
that's my belief. And that's, and it's either going to resonate, so people are going to get excited about that, or it's not. And it's like, great, there's plenty other places that probably think like you do, and that's probably where you should be. If
Mm-hmm.
you don't start there, I think that's where a lot of companies get into trouble as they grow. They don't have that north star, they don't have that why defined, and it really is growth and profit, right? It's
Right. And I think also agreed, but I also think if people fully describe the why, it's so ridiculous.
Yeah.
Then people would be like, wait, seriously? We're all here for that? And
Yeah.
it's just kind of it's
Well, you're breaking into people's person, like, again, this is at the political, religious, like, everybody has foundational beliefs, right? And so for someone like me, my foundational beliefs are very flexible in that this is what I believe because of the data I have today and the research I've done and the education I've had. And if data to the contrary comes along and disproves some of my foundation, it's not going to rock my world,
mhm.
because I'm very flexible in that regard. Some people were brought up in very strict backgrounds to where there was like even physical or mental consequences for not buying into the system of
Yep.
beliefs.
Yep.
And so when you start to pull at those threads, I mean, you're literally trying to pull that person apart. I mean, not
Mhm.
intentionally,
Mhm. Yeah,
but
yeah.
if you
Psychologically
don't
you are. Yeah.
understand how deep those beliefs are rooted, you could be doing damage unintentionally. So that's where it's a fine line when you walk in and say, like, hey, this is what I believe. I'm not saying you have to believe it, but if you don't, you're probably going to struggle in this organization, because the people who are here foundationally believe this, like, we're all fighting on the same team for, closing that gap. Like, that's
Mhm.
getting to ESOP was just the first part. Becoming a good ESOP is the second part. And then incentivizing other organizations to follow our path is the third part. That's
Mhm.
how you're going to create this employee owned economy. And I mean, there's 236 ESOPs in Illinois.
That's it?
That's it. There's 6,900 in the country. There's
So I heard the
236 in Illinois.
18,000 is that so
Well, I mean, you can ask Corey, because I
I
got,
struggle because when I was talking to Corey, it was like there's like 11 million people working for ESOPs in the country and 12.5 million working for private equity. But for employee owned, I think that it's lumped in with like public companies with stock. I don't know. It was a little convoluted, some of that stat to me.
well,
Because if you only
so
have 6,900, go
yeah,
ahead.
we're a member of NCEO, and like all the data I just gave you was from their slides. So
Okay.
like you'll
Well,
have to ask Corey.
yeah, and I wonder if it's 11 million people that work for the 6,900 or because I think there was kind of like two tranches of like
Yeah.
types or like attributes of it.
Yep.
Um, But so as we're getting close to wrapping up here, Eric, is I want to how if you think about yourself back with those bottle of Tums and you're having a conversation with yourself, how would you describe your perspective right now to the old you and why the journey was worth it?
Well, the thing I would tell my younger self would be to get, coaching, mentoring, and mental health help a lot sooner. Like that was the big hurdle. Is I'm a very stubborn person, and I've had to overcome a lot of that, ingrained stubbornness. So the learning curve was very steep and very hard. So that would be kind of the first thing, is like, is it worth it? 100%, because becoming, this person I am now, which I think is a lot more curious by nature, and really the curiosity is what keeps opening the doors and keeps things interesting and exciting, and allows me and the team to help more people. So like that's the thing, is like I think the younger me was just too naive and too angry. There was a lot of unresolved issues that, you know, not one thing. It wasn't just the coaching. It wasn't just, the therapy. Like all of those things had to happen, but
Mm-hmm.
had they happened sooner, the impact would have been greater. So that's the thing I can, you're never too young or too old to start those journeys. But having coaches, mentors, and therapists, like I
Mm-hmm.
believe everybody on the planet should have one of each. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's,
Yeah.
we're humans, and it's a difficult journey. It's,
Mm-hmm.
even in the best circumstances, being human is not an easy task.
Amen to that. How have you you talked about hacking your dopamine for the healthy reasons. So how have you tied your activities and what you're doing today to healthy dopamine fixes? Like how are you getting your dopamine fix on the journey you're on right now?
Well, I think that goes back to the EOS stuff that we do. So, um, I, we've been using EOS, running on EOS for about 3 years now, and so that visionary integrator relationship is key to that. So our integrator is like 180 degrees wired differently, but I have him as an outlet now for the crazy. And so rather than the crazy getting dumped on everybody in the company at random intervals, and then have them go like, what are we doing now? Like, wait a minute, that's a complete shift from what you just said last week. There's a process we put in place where there's a spot for me to dump all my crazy. He filters through it, and anything that may have merit, we dive into if I'm still interested in it. Like, so there's a cooling off period
Yeah, I
too.
like it.
Yeah.
So there's
So,
and the dopamine's when you actually find one that's worth pursuing.
well, the dopamine is just coming up with them. Like that's half of the battle,
And
is
then just
just like,
letting it just go, right? And
yeah,
just like
I think every idea is a winner. And, like, cause that's just like, I do have this gift. So part of, going back to Doug Brackman's book, Driven, there's this thing called persistent background awareness. And so I'm wired to, like, even we could be in a restaurant with like 100 people, and you and I could be engaged in a really deep conversation, and I'm fully present. Part of my brain is listening to what's going on around, and it's just pulling pieces and storing them. And then when I'm in down mode or sleeping, whatever, it just starts stitching a narrative together and goes, think about this. And that's just it's a gift. And
yeah.
that's part of how, he references it to being like a spider sense in the book.
Mm,
And it's like, you just know something's going to happen. And, some people refer to it as intuition, but it's literally how your brain is picking up
processing.
on things that regular people, because he calls it about the farmer world. Everybody's safe and secure, and we're all very sedentary now, and there's no danger. Well, some of us are still living in the prehistoric world of there's
Hmm.
danger everywhere, and our brains are looking for that, and we stitch narratives together. So yeah.
It's
And
yeah.
it could be good. Like, again, if you're spotting things that people are always aware of, you can use it as a competitive advantage for sure. But if you're just dumping that on everybody without context, it's
Mhm.
a it's a destructive force, because people get scared. It's
Hmm.
like, are
Well,
you just crazy? It's like, no, it's
oh,
not crazy. It's a
oh,
gift.
you just tapped into something that like I think I might be able to articulate clearer than I have in the past. Is so when I think about intentional growth and people and entrepreneurs taking what they want and using the company as a vehicle to go get it, money needing to be one of the variables, but not the ultimate goal. And when for the hundreds of people that end up being miserable after they sold to a third party and then they just didn't have, it just turned into something that they didn't expect. That's one thing. Like the legacy thing is one thing. I think people understand that, Eric. And so we don't have to go into that. And then people understand the money thing. But one thing, how you just worded what you just described about your dopamine and the ideas, and if it, and I don't, this is just a hypothesis at this point, but if there's a good percentage of entrepreneurs that are visionaries that are addicted to understanding that chaos and turning into order, like we started the conversation with, then the company is a unique environment and sandbox slash playground to try that stuff on.
Mhm.
And without it, there's nowhere to stitch all those things together, go to a boardroom the next day, and be like, let's try this. And so what happens is it's like what I think, if I said very, like I said, maybe clearer than I've ever said it, that playground is worth more than, and potentially could be worth millions of dollars to say no to the highest offer, because they can wake up, stitch those ideas together, pull some levers, impact people's lives, and see what happens. Kind of like a Walt Disney at his playground in Disneyland. I don't know if that resonates with you, but I find it very fascinating.
Well, I think the unchecked version of that are the people who label themselves serial entrepreneurs.
Huh?
Is
Interesting. Yeah.
like with I'm using just my case as an example. It's like I have my sandbox, but I have processes to unleash that without damaging the company. Like, and I used to,
That is so well said. I love how you
well,
said that.
before our integrator got here, it was unchecked, and it definitely caused a lot of harm because you scare people. You seem unstable because you're just in every direction. And now that you have a process, and I have a process to put all that in, I still get my dopamine fix, and then I have a filter and a lens. Somebody's looking
Mm,
through that. An adult is monitoring my behavior, and then we can choose to pursue things in a proper fashion and then roll them out into the company through the EOS quarterly and annual. There, and it's less scary to everybody else. People who don't have that, I think, wind up doing the serial entrepreneur route probably more than not, because instead of using the companies, they just start popping up companies everywhere, and then they get bored and they move on to the next, and it's, if you don't have right people right at the start, it's just a bunch of companies that don't go anywhere.
hmm.
But I'm a serial entrepreneur, and it's like, okay, so you and I have the same thing, and we lack focus. I have somebody trying to help keep it in, and nobody's really curtailing you, so you're just spinning companies up left
Right.
and right. Not
Right.
you,
Right.
but like
Yeah. Yeah.
the
Yeah.
yeah,
No, figuratively. Well, and it's interesting, Eric, because I think that this is kind of I think it's potentially one of the root issues too behind what, like when I say like create a sustainable business that has sustainable cash flow and the valuation, the equity valuation that you need based on the cash flow. And it goes from this like exciting time of innovation and then it's blocking and tackling. Like there are home services clients that we work with that are printing money and it's like they're not doing anything AI driven. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Garage doors, landscaping, cleaning, and like they're creating really good companies, but it's not like crazy new. You know what I mean? So I think there's a way based on how you just describe it to have your, what is it? Make your cake and eat it too. Like you can do both if you have the process and the filters, like you just said, where you can get your dopamine. I think that's what ends up happening, Eric, is so many people end up calling me up that they're bored, they're burnt out, and they want to change, and they blow up their whole life and company for the dopamine fix. Honest
right.
to God, I swear.
Well, that's Doug's book says there's two types. There's the D2 and D4, and I'm paraphrasing from memory, so this may not be accurate. So asterisk, air quotes. But I think the D2s are the ones who, the dopamine rush. They're also the ones who skydive. They're the ones who drive 150 miles an hour. They'll go hiking in the woods barefoot, with no provisions and just expect to survive. They push the envelope of life, not just business, but
Mm,
the business dopamine's not enough. So they got to push their boundaries with their own physical and safety.
mhm.
And like, that's thankfully not me. Like, I'm 55 miles an hour on the high. I'm the people everybody hates driving with. Like, I, my dopamine fix is fine with the business life. From a, my personal safety and well-being, I do not crave dopamine in that regard. So I'm not a risk taker with my health.
But I think there's correlations there that is fascinating. I think this goes back to then self-awareness. Megan, what are you trying to solve for? And then building the plan backwards instead of like asking the why.
Yeah, everything
Eric,
comes
this
back to why.
yeah, man, this has been so fun. Anything that we should have touched on that we haven't? I mean, I'm sure there's a big list, but in the
Yeah,
container of
I'm
this
not going to
conversation.
touch that. Yeah, no, we're good.
Okay.
we,
We're
we,
good. Yeah. Plead the fifth. Plead the fifth. Two questions for you then, man. Intentional. I'd say this conversation was very in line with it, but what would you say the word intentional means to you?
giving deep thought. It drives back to the why. It's not following the herd because we've always done it that way. It's really sitting with it, putting some thought behind the actions and the outcomes.
Eric, this has been a blast. Where can people find you, WebIT, and what you guys are doing, and follow the journey?
Yeah. So webitservices.com, that's our website. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm all over the place on LinkedIn. And if you want to give us a call, where it's at 630-870-1088. Somebody will know
Eric,
where to find me.
I love it, man. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
My pleasure.